Hey guys, welcome to a new Java EE tutorial. Today I will show you how to create a RESTful web service in your Java EE application and how to call a RESTful web service with the new Java EE 7 RESTful client. This tutorial will not cover the concept of RESTful web services. It's just an explanation on how to provide RESTful web services in Java EE as well as consuming them from our web application. We will start by creating the endpoint. We will create a new dynamic web project. I will call it REST example. We go to next, and then we take the cross at the generate web XML deployment descriptor and press finish. Now we just create a simple package structure, and inside here we will create a new class which is called REST service, but you can call it however you like. To define that our web project includes a RESTful web service, we need to add the add application path method and define the application path, which will be in this case /resources, and we also need to extend from the application class from the Java XWSRS core. Now this will be RESTful web service, and we also need to add an add path annotation here where we define the path of this special class where we find it in our RESTful web service. So this will be my REST service. Inside here we will now create a new method. I will call it getHelloMessage, and this will just return a simple hello world string. To make this access via the RESTful web service, we need to add the add-get annotation from the Java XWSRS package, or you can use the other HTTP methods like post, put, or delete as well. Now we add a path annotation again to define which path needs to be called to access this special method. I will call this say hello. So let's check which URL we need to call to access our web service. So this will be localhost port 8080, and then it's the context root of our application, which is REST example, then the application path, which is resources, followed by the path of our class, which is my REST service, and last but not least, the path to our method, which is say hello. This is basically all we need to create such a web service. Now I will deploy this to our application server, and I copy this one here, go to the browser, enter it, and you see we are here with our hello world text, which was returned by the method. Now we will create a second method here where we will now also accept a parameter to be passed through the web service, and this will be a public response get echo message where we use the add query param annotation to define that the message will be string message. So the query parameter with the name message will be passed into our variable msg, and we can now work with this variable inside our method. Here we also again import the Java XWSRS core response and add the get parameter as well at the path which I define under echo. Now what's the difference between returning a string or object or a response? You can directly return a string or a custom created object, but when you return a response you can also say something like this: response.serverError or status, and here you could just put in status 500, which would be internal server error. So you don't need to return a string containing something. You can also return that something gone wrong in your application. So this is an alternative way, and here we just say OK, which creates us a new OK status response. Inside here we will now pass our object. In this case it will be simply a string, but you could put any other object inside here as well. And I say your message was, and behind here we'll put the message that was entered by the query param dot build, and now this should work. We will test it by republishing it. We only need to change the say hello and add an echo. Then we use the question mark and write message, which was our query param, is test, for example. Enter it, and you see your message was test. We have now returned simple objects such as a string. We'll now create a custom new complex object. I just name it simple object here, and this would get two variables. The first is the ID, and the second one will be a simple name. I will create getters and setters, and this would be all we need to return an object. If we want to return this object as an XML file, we will need to define the XML root element at the top here, and I will just create a constructor to easily create this object, and we also need an empty constructor for Juxb to convert this object to an XML file. We go back to our service and add a third method, which will be public simple object, and I just call it get object. Inside here we just return a new simple object using the recently created constructor. I will just put in ID1 and again the name is test. This will be again a get call and the path where we just say this will be available under object. So we will now publish this again on our server, change this against object, and as you can see we get returned an XML file. If you don't want to return an XML file but a JSON file instead, you can also use the add produces annotation defining a media type, and here we just say the application JSON media type, save it, publish this again, call the web service, and you see now it's a JSON response. It's also possible to define multiple return types, for example media type.application XML, so the client could choose between receiving an XML file or a JSON file. We will now create our client. We will create a new class called REST client, and this will be an application scoped managed bean. So this is not required at all. I would just create a simple facelet side to access a method that I call public void call, which will call our web service with the new JAX-WS RESTful client. To activate JSF, I will just copy the basic servlet mapping for our facelet service and also copy an empty beans XML file to activate the CDI. And I will also delete the welcome files and rename the index HTML to index XHTML. Now we are only missing the index XHTML file, and here I will just paste in a simple body of a JSF site where we will now add an H command button. Here we will add the value call web service, and the action will be our REST client bean and the call method. So this is basically to actually call the event in our backing bean. You could also trigger it however you want. We go back to our REST client, and he will now create a new variable from the Java XWS RS client package, which will be our client, and we will use the client builder to create a new client. Or we can say client.target. In the target we now our URL, which needs to be called, and in the end we want to call our object method. Then we could add query params with the method query param if we would call a web service with query params, but in this case we have no parameters to send, so we can just call request.get, and because we know that this service is returning a simple object, we use this simple object class to receive an object of this type. We will also save the simple object in a variable and print it on the console so we see it's working. We publish this, go back to our web browser where we now go to our context root. We see our button called web service, and now we need to watch the console, and nothing is happening here. Oh, we forget to add a form tag around our command button, so quickly add this here, publish again, switch back to the console and call the web service again. Now you see we got the information that we received a simple object. We don't have a toString method, which I will generate to get a better view on this object. Publish it, and we now see the simple object was received and it contains the correct parameters that were set on the server side. You could of course call any other web service which is not deployed on your local machine. So this is just a simple example how to use the RESTful client. That's all for now. I hope you enjoyed watching the video. If you have any questions, feel free to write a comment, and I hope I see you soon.